Before we get into this photo edit inside Luminar Neo, firstly let me say thank you for sticking around. This is the first video I've created for 10 weeks. Now you may have seen some videos released onto the channel during that time, but they were all pre-recorded because I knew I was going to have to take an extended time away from my channel. My father has not been well, and so I've travelled from New Zealand to spend time with him in England, and it was really valuable time spent with him. Don't want to get into that because I'll lose my focus, but what I do want to say is that I did take a lot of photos while I was over there. I did have an opportunity to travel the extent of England, went all the way up to Edinburgh as well, across to Wales and back down, so that was amazing. So if you want to see how I process those inside Luminar Neo, there's a lot of learning available for us to work through, so subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Now we're going to be working on a photo I took at Holy Island, amazing place, of Lindisfarne Castle, which sits atop of a mound, and it looks amazing. However, I don't really feel like the raw version of the photo does it justice or lives up to the vision that I have for this, and so I'm going to take a creative approach inside Luminar Neo to see whether we can't just breathe a bit of life into the raw file, try and accentuate the contrast that exists on the castle and the landmass, and at the same time give it more of a kind of moody feel to the photo as well. We're going to kick things off with develop raw, so let's just get into Luminar Neo. I can't talk. So in front of me here I've got 3 different edits that I've done on the same photo. I've just processed them slightly different in preparation for this video. And if you ever want to create a copy of a photo so that you can work on it separately and create a new edit, all you need to do is right click on it and just go to Show in Explorer. And here you can see that we have 5 separate copies of the same photo here. So all you need to do is press Ctrl+C on your keyboard to copy, and then Ctrl+V to paste a brand new version of that. That's all I need to do. You can see in the background here that the photos have shifted over, and we have a new instance of this photo, and this is the original that we're going to work on and try and create something similar to what I just had before. So I'm going to jump into the edit section, let Luminar load this in, and the first thing I want to do is obviously jump into my develop raw, because that's where the heavy lifting of our photo edit starts, and I'm just going to apply an Adobe standard profile to that, and that is set up for my Fuji X-T4, and that's just going to give me a slightly better color accuracy than the Luminar default. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually boost the exposure up, because we can see that the original was just a little bit underexposed. So we'll bring that exposure up and now move on to the smart contrast. Now while pushing smart contrast up, I really love what that's doing to the landmass here and the Lindisfarne castle itself. However, we're losing the sky. Reason for that is the foreground's darker, the sky is brighter, and so it's accentuating that contrast. So contrary to what you might think counterintuitively, I'm actually going to set that in the negative direction. Yes, I'm flattening out the contrast in my photo at the moment, but that's what I actually want, because what I'm wanting to do is actually set this photo up at the moment so I have the maximum amount of data, so that Luminar's got all the information, all that pixel information it needs for a complete edit. Now, one thing I would like to do to actually stretch out this histogram so that our whites meet the far side and the blacks meet the far left. Now, one way to do that would obviously be just to grab the black point and start moving that down, and we could do the same with the whites and move that up, and that is certainly going to introduce contrast. However, if I press the J key on my keyboard, which shows us the warnings for where we've blown out to pure white and pure black, which isn't what we want, and we're also getting a lot of kind of crushed detail in the shadows here. That's, yeah, just not the look I'm after. So I'm going to double click the blacks, double click the whites, and that's going to reset that. An alternative way to do it is to work on the curve section here. So we open that up by clicking on the title, and now I can move the white point. If I move that over to the left, anything that falls to the right of that point, and you can see now a lot of that data is blowing out to pure white. Really, we just want a minimal amount of red pixels. In fact, like hardly any is perfect, something like that. And we can do the same on the left hand side for the black pixels. We just grab that point and start moving it over, and as you can see, the further we push that over, we start just blocking out those black pixels. That's not what we want. We just want to just start tickling in some black pixels, and you can just see some on the wall here. And in the rocks, that might even still be just a little bit too much, and I would say that's just about perfect. And now we have our black and our white point set. If we want to reintroduce some contrast by bringing the shadows down, boosting the highlights up, we can absolutely do that. However, I'm just going to manipulate this curve so that we're not bringing up the highlights. We'll bring up the midtones a bit, and we'll keep those shadows nice and rich. So we'll just bring up those midtones just a wee bit, and let's have a quick toggle of where we came from and where we've got to. Before and after, this is already looking like it's in a much better place. The white balance isn't too bad, but if we want to just have a little play with that, we can do. Just fine tune that, make sure we're happy with those, which I am. But one thing I've noticed with this photo is that the colours are pretty undersaturated, and so I'm going to get pretty aggressive with this, and I'm going to go over the top. I'm really going to bring out all those colours in the green grass here, also reintroduce some blue into the sky and the orange in the castle as well, and that's actually going to enable me to better manipulate these particular areas. So using the colour tool later on, I'm going to show you how we can actually dial in to these areas and brighten up this area of grass for just a little bit more impact, maybe even just darken down that sky to give us a bit more mood in the image as well. If you do want to add saturation into your photo, it's a much better idea to do it through the Develop Raw tool here, because obviously we are working on the raw pixels, the raw data, which gives us a lot more latitude for making changes. Whereas once you start working with the other tools, once you've locked in that Develop Raw, you're no longer working on that raw file. And so yeah, you could grab the saturation slider here and start cranking that up. But the most accurate way to increase your color is to work through the color section within Develop Raw. Okay, let's move on to the sharpness, and the best way to judge sharpness is to zoom into 100%. Make sure that Luminar has rendered your photo clearly so you can see what's going on, and then we can just grab the sharpness slider and start pushing that all the way to the right to see what that's doing for us. And I've always said this about Luminar's sharpening, it is a really nice algorithm, it does a great job, but with any sharpening you're going to start to introduce or magnify any noise that you have in your file. Obviously, we could use Luminar's noiseless AI before we start. However, if you don't have that plugin, it's okay. You can reduce some of that luminosity noise just by grabbing that slider there and just pushing that up slightly. Somewhere low for this picture, like 11 is fine, or alternatively, you can actually increase the masking as well. And so for areas that don't actually hold as much contrast and as much detail, it's not going to apply that sharpening as heavily there. But you do need to be careful, because the further you push the noise reduction and also the masking, the more plasticky your photo can start to look. So it's a bit of a balancing game between controlling the noise in your photo and also retaining those details. Somewhere like that, I'm pretty happy with. And once we've made those changes, we can just come up and toggle the eyeball tool to see our before, pretty underexposed, and then our after. And I think we've made a nice improvement over the original file already. So one of the things I want to do with this photo is draw our viewers' attention to where the sunlight is actually hitting the hill here. And we've got these nice swathes of light casting across the field as well. And I really want to draw attention to those. They're already nicely lit up, but they're pretty saturated. I've done that deliberately, and that is so that I can jump into the color tool and actually dial into those colors directly. So from within the saturation tab, if I grab the green slider and start moving that up, you can see that we can add more saturation to that green or just take it away as well. The yellows are also very dominant in that area, and you can see that as I boost that up as well. However, it's not the saturation that I'm wanting to boost, it's actually the brightness, the luminance. So I'm going to grab the green slider and start moving that up. What about the yellow as well? Look at that. As I push that up, that's really bringing a bit of pop and life to the side of the hillside there. Let's have a quick look at our before and our after. Before and after. It's also enhancing the light on the castle as well. It's a little bit overcooked. I'm just going to bring that back down a little bit. And because the brickwork in the castle is kind of orangey as well, what if we boost that up? Yeah, so this is by dropping it down and bringing it up, we can also add emphasis to the highlights on the side of the castle. Another thing we could do from inside this HSL, hue, saturation and luminance section, is we can actually shift the hue itself. So for example, if we found the green just a little bit too vibrant, we could actually move this more towards a nice warm kind of yellowy look. So if I grab that and push that all that way, you can see how we're manipulating that color. So we can grab the yellows and move them away from the greens and more into a kind of yellowy orange palette. And we can do the same with the greens as well. That might not be your thing, but for me, I don't like oversaturated greens in my photos. So I'm just going to also bring the saturation of that yellow and green down as well. But I'm not going to do it too far because I still want life in that area. And I'm also going to be adding another tool, which is going to add some contrast, some lovely local contrast into this, which is actually going to dull down some of that saturation as well. But we'll get to that in a minute. I'm just going to use this color tool one more time, but this time I want to bring out a bit of drama in the sky. So let's open the color tool up again and let's jump into the luminance section again. And I'm just going to work with the blues of the sky and see if by darkening them down, I can't make that just a little bit more moody, a bit more kind of stormy looking. That's the look I'm going for in this photo. So I'm just dropping down any colors which are represented in the sky. So that's the cyan, the blues and the purples. So I'm just trying to make them a bit darker. That's as far as I can push it. However, we have lost a little bit of the color there, so I can now come into the saturation and just balance it out by bringing back a little bit of that blue. Probably not too much. Do the same with the purples and maybe the cyan as well. Let's close that down and we'll have a little toggle of our before and after. Right back to the beginning, and this is where we've got to. So here's our before. I'm well aware that the landmass is picking up light from the setting sun, but here is our after. We really accentuated that. But what if I want to push this even further and add a bit more drama into this area here? I really want people's focus going here. Well, that's exactly what we're going to do now. Come on down here. And I'm going to apply some of the dramatic filter. So I'm going to grab the amount slider and start applying this filter. And you can see if I go really heavy handed with this, and I'll just press J so that we get rid of those warnings and we can see a bit clearer what's going on. We're really introducing high contrast into this. Blacks are accentuated, the highlights, the whites are accentuated, but by doing that, we're also losing a little bit of saturation. And I knew I wanted to use this tool, and I knew that it was going to desaturate these areas, and that's why I pumped a little bit of extra saturation in during that initial develop raw process. So at the moment, this is far too much. I don't want to push it that far, so I want to bring it down. Around midway is fine, and if I just toggle that effect off and on and off and on, I don't really want that applied everywhere. I just want it applied where I want people's attention to go. So of course I'm going to use my mask to paint this effect back in. So I'm going to have a brush, have it in paint mode, and the strength of 41 is fine. I'm going to click once on the castle and just paint it in a little bit. Let's have a little look at our before and after, a very subtle introduction. And now I'm just going to start building this up over the sort of central area of the photo where the elements of interest are, such as the interesting bit of the sky, the castle, and a little bit of light across the field as well. Here's our before, here's our after, and if you've gone too far in any area, like maybe we have over the sky here, I can just paint that away. So here's our before, after. If you like the look of Luminar Neo as a photo editor and you don't have it yet, 𝗨𝘀𝗲 have actually given me a couple of new coupon codes that you guys are welcome to use. They're going to save you up to 10% on the purchase price. So I'll put that in the description below along with a link to get hold of it if it looks like a good fit for you. Now as I flick between the before and after, I like the progress we're making. However, one of the issues I've got is that the sunlight is not just hitting the castle here, it's also bathed right across this field in the foreground here. And there are several ways that we could take care of that and control it, but I'm going to use a tool that I don't often use in my videos, and that is Relight AI, because this is ideal for taking care of the brightness level in your foreground and your background. So all I need to do for the brightness is grab the brightness near slider, and that is going to start darkening down this foreground, which is what I want. And then I can just grab the depth slider to control how far into the scene I want this effect to go. And so I will still want a little bit of this sunlight to be kissing the field here, yet this foreground area, I just want that darkened off. And I'm happy with that. I'll close that down and we can use the same effect to control the sky as well. I could have tried doing that in the same tool. However, I like to separate my foreground and my background, and that just gives me a little bit more control if I want to manipulate the masks specifically to the foreground or the background. So now I'm just going to grab the brightness far slider and I'm going to darken this down because I really want to create like a moody look in the top part of the sky. I can play around with the depth slider again or some of the advanced settings. However, the easiest way to get what I want is just to jump into the masking, and I'm going to use a linear gradient. So I'm going to say have the maximum amount of this effect at the very top and then feather it off towards the horizon line. So I'm just going to click once at the top of the photo and drag down. I do feel like the castle is getting a little bit too bright on me, so the fact that I'm pulling this over the top of the castle and getting a little bit of this darkening effect, I'm not worried about that. And now if I close this down, we're going to see that effect in action. And if you want to see the before and after of just that particular effect, it's gone now. It's jumped into the edits section, as have all of the edits that have made up this photo edit so far. They're all existing within this edits tab now. And you can see that here's the Relight AI that I applied for the foreground. So we can see that before and after, and then we can do the same with the sky, before and after. And it's just a subtle darkening from the top down and the bottom up, helping to lead our viewer's eye to this central part of the photo. Now, because I have darkened down the foreground, one thing that's bothering me about that is it's adding some saturation into the foreground. It's the same kind of effect as when you use the dodge and burn tool. Your saturation can get increased. It's not ideal. There are better ways to actually deal with this that I've shown in other videos, so I won't cover it here. However, if you are using the Relight AI tool or the dodge and burn tool, you add saturation, you might just need to come in and add an additional tool just to control that. So we could do that a couple of ways. But probably the best way to do that would either be to come into the color section, and I'm going to crank the saturation up initially just so that I can see which colors exist here. And you can see that we've got this kind of faux orange that has been introduced, and so I'm going to come into the orange section in saturation and just grab that slider and start to pull that down. We can do the same for the yellow as well, and maybe even the red. Now if I double click the saturation slider to reset that, and we toggle our before and after, yes, it's affecting the whole photo at the moment, but predominantly it's the foreground here. And again, we can use a mask, which we can click from the bottom, drag up, so that it's only affecting this area here. So again, I've closed the tool, so that's now popped over into the edit section, but it's accessible to me. Here's our before, quite orangey on the ground, and as I release, you can see that we're desaturating that area. But rather than just desaturating it, I feel like it might actually need some green injected into it. So I can come in and make that adjustment just by coming into the hue section. We know that that color existing there was orange. So if I move this left and right, you can see how we can take that color and either shift it towards the reds, or if I move it the other way, we're going into the green part of the spectrum. And I think that's more what we want to match in with this photo. Okay, I'm going to jump back into the tools section here, and let's take a look at our photo as an overall, because you always want to assess the edits that you've made to your photo and ask yourself, am I moving my photo with my photo editing towards the goal that I'd set for myself? And I wanted something that was moody, almost stormy looking, with the highlight on the hill and the castle drawing the attention here. So I'm saying, hey, the center part of the photo here is the most important. So I've added contrast, I've added brightness, but there are certain areas where I feel like my eye is just being called up. So for example, this brighter bit of cloud here where I'm moving the mouse, that is catching my eye. The same in the top left as well. A little trick for you is if you blur your eyes when you're looking at your photo, all of the bright areas that are screaming, look at me, that you may not have even really noticed because they get lost in the detail, they'll start to stand out to you. So as I blur my eyes, I can see the bright areas of this photo. And if there's parts of the photo that I don't want people looking at that are still very bright, so the bit of cloud here and these elements up here, I want them gone. And so how am I going to take care of that? Well, for me, the easiest way to do this would be to borrow certain areas of the cloud where it's darker and flatter and just paint that over the top. And what tool do we use to do that? Well, that is the clone tool. So all I'm going to do is just choose clone and click to sample an area I want to borrow from, and then I'm going to paint that over this area. So I'm going to click to the right here. That is my sample point, and now I can paint that wherever I want. So for example, if I click and start painting somewhere I don't want it, you can see that I'm literally borrowing from the top right of the photo, and I'm able to paint that in a new location. That's what's going on here. And if you make a mistake with your cloning and you don't want something somewhere, just press Ctrl-Z on your keyboard and it's gone. So I'm going to resample this area here, make sure I'm getting an area I want. So I'm going to hold the Alt key and click once. I now have this area selected and I can paint it over the cloud. but I'm not wanting to paint it with 100%. I'm going to do it subtly. So I'm going to go about halfway, sort of 50%, and now I can click and paint over it. So it's not fully removed that little section, it's just painted 50% of this over the top, which has helped to darken it down. And I'm just going to go for one more little pass there. Alright, so let's do the same over this side. I'm going to click here. That's going to set my sample point by holding the Alt or Option key on Mac, clicking, come over the bright area and just paint that little cloud in there. Done. Let's do the same here. I'm going to sample from here, very flat area, just paint that over that bit of cloud, another bit there. I don't want to destroy the detail in the clouds, I just want to get rid of those bright areas. So if we come down to the eyeball tool, I'll close that one down as well. Again, here we go. Let's look at our before, and now I'm going to release for the after. You can see the detail that's there originally, and it's really saying, hey, look at me, come up to the top of the frame. I don't want that, so I clone it out just minimally. Here's our before, here's our after, and I prefer that. So now there is just one final touch I want to do to this photo, give it a unifying color grade. And there are a lot of ways that you can color grade inside Luminar Neo that are a lot of fun, but one of my favorites is just with the mood tool because it's so simple. So all I need to do is choose a lookup table. I could go for anything, but one that I think would work quite well for this one would be the wooden look. And if I crank the amount up, you can see that kind of contrasty sepia look that it's applying over the whole photo. Obviously that is too strong, I don't want that much effect, but we could go pretty aggressive with it, somewhere around 40. We can play with the contrast within that if we want to, so I can add a bit more contrast or pull it back if I choose to. And it's possible we've lost a little bit of saturation, so I might just reintroduce a bit of saturation. I'm actually finding that the highlights in the sky along the horizon here are a little bit too extreme, so I'm just going to come down to the super contrast tool and just see if I can't control those with the highlight contrast. If I push that across, it's not doing too much. Oh, I knew the mid-tone contrast wasn't actually going to do anything for this area I'm wanting to fix, but you know what? In terms of the overall photo and wanting to add a more punchy kind of look, I don't mind that. There you go, a little bit of serendipity by adding in this mid-tone contrast. I quite like that. Didn't expect it to work, but I think that works quite well. Alright, let's have a look at which tools have gone into our edits to make this final photo edit up. We did a lot of work with the Develop Raw tool to take it from a pretty flat underexposed negative, and we've corrected the exposure, the contrast, and I oversaturated it, which I did deliberately so that I could jump in and start manipulating those colors more easily. Because they were more saturated, it was more easy for me to dial into Luminar Neo and say, these are the colors that I want to manipulate. So first of all, I did a little bit of work brightening up the grass through here. I feel like I may have gone a little bit too far on the foreground as well. Didn't take care of it with the masking, but we've just brightened that area up and we deal to that later. Next, I used the blue slider to darken down the sky before introducing a bit of the dramatic filter, but I masked that in so it was only affecting the Lindisfarne castle and the mound on which it's built. So here was our before, here was our after. I feel like we were heading in the right direction in terms of the edit that I was wanting to create. Next, I darkened down the foreground with the intention of leading the viewer's eye more to the bright areas in this photo, and then I did the same with the top part of the sky there. I was aware that by darkening down the foreground here, we'd introduced some unwanted saturation, and that was showcasing the fact that the grass was very orangey here. Didn't really match in with the greens that we have in the rest of the photo, so I used a quick color adjustment there just to darken that down and manipulate the orange hues more towards the greens. We then used the clone tool to take away those bright parts of the sky that I was finding just a little bit distracting, so I just cloned out from other parts of the sky that were a bit flatter, just with a strength of about 50%, just to softly paint that over the top. I then unified the photo by using a lookup table, a mood. I went for the wooden one and just applied that with 40%, so that just helps to unify those colors. You may prefer the original, but you know, it's my edit. It's a very creative thing that we do here inside of Luminar, working on edits like this, and it's entirely up to you as the editor what you like the look of. And so the final thing I did, I was just looking at bringing back some of that detail in the sky there that was getting a little bit blown out, but as a side effect, I found that the mid-tones contrast looked pretty good. So here was our before, here was our after, a bit more color, a bit more punch. Here is our before, here is our after, and whether you guys like that transition from this original raw photo to the final edit inside Luminar Neo, you know, that's a matter of preference. But in any case, I do hope that I've shared some valuable tools, processing tips with you guys that you can start implementing on your photo edits as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so, because I'm going to be covering more of the photos I took while I was away and how I might tackle those with edits inside of Luminar Neo. And if you don't have Luminar Neo yet and you think it'd be a good fit for your photo editing, I've got a link in the description below with a discount code for you as well. And I promise that next time you won't be waiting as long for another video to drop. In the meantime, if you want to watch another one of my videos, there's one right there that might be worth checking out. I'll see you in that one. Cheers guys, bye bye for now.